My name is Ruth. The hum of the refrigerator was my only companion in the too-quiet house. It's a sound you don't notice until the other sounds are gone. Until the easy chair in the corner isn't creaking under the weight of the man you love, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he turned a page. Until the soft, rhythmic sound of his breathing isn't there in the bed beside you at night. Robert had been gone for 3 months. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. And the silence was a physical presence, a heavy, gray blanket smothering everything. I was 53 years old, and I felt like a ghost in my own home. Our home. The one we'd poured 20 years of our lives into. This wasn't just a house. It was every scuff mark on the hardwood floor from moving furniture. Every splash of paint on the porch where I'd tried my hand at being an artist. The garden out back that Robert had nurtured with a patience I could only admire. It was us. I was standing at the kitchen sink, staring out at that garden now looking a little wild, a little lost without his tending hand when the doorbell chimed. It was a cheerful, melodic sound that felt utterly alien. My heart did a little stutter step. Company, unannounced company. These days, my Auntie Grace would call first, her voice soft with concern. Just checking in, my darling. Do you need anything? Soup? A strong shoulder? This wasn't Auntie Grace. I smoothed down my sweater, a thick cable-knit thing that had been Robert's favorite, and walked to the door. Through the frosted glass, I saw a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette. My breath caught. For a wild, impossible second, I thought, but no. It was Mark, Robert's son. I opened the door, and there he was, a smile already plastered on his face. It was a good smile, practiced, the kind that reached his eyes in a way that never quite felt genuine with me. "Ruth," he said, his voice a warm baritone, "you're looking well." "Mark," I said, stepping back to let him in. "This is a surprise. I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check on you." He stepped inside, his eyes doing a quick, appraising sweep of the entryway. It was a habit I'd noticed more and more since the funeral. He wasn't just looking, he was inventorying. "That's kind of you," I said, leading him into the living room. "Can I get you some coffee, tea?" No, don't trouble yourself." He settled himself into Robert's chair. My Robert's chair, the one I still couldn't bring myself to sit in. He looked comfortable there, his arms resting on the worn leather. It sent a sharp pang through me. We made small talk for a few minutes. He asked about my sleep, my appetite, if the folks from the bank had been helpful when I'd gone in to have my name added to all the accounts. It all sounded so caring, so responsible. But there was an undercurrent, a subtle pressure I couldn't quite name. "You know, Ruth," he said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "This is a big house for one person. A lot of upkeep. The roof, the yard. Dad always took such good care of it all. It must be overwhelming for you." I felt a prickle of defensiveness. "I'm managing, Mark. I've lived here for 20 years. I know this house." "Of course you do," he said, his tone placating. "I just worry. You've been through so much. And let's be honest, Dad always handled the complicated things, the finances, the investments." The air in the room shifted. This was no longer a casual check-in. "Robert and I handled our life together, Mark," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. I may not have been the one crunching the numbers, but I was right there beside him. I know what we have. He gave me that smile again, the one that didn't reach his eyes. I know you think that. But the world of finance can be brutal. There are people who would see a woman in your position, a recent widow, as an easy target. In my position. What position was that? Grieving? A woman? 53? Mark, I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable. I'm sure you are, he interrupted, not unkindly, but firmly. But for my own peace of mind, why don't you let me help? Just for a little while. I can take a look at the portfolio, make sure everything is in order. Dad would have wanted me to make sure you were protected. Protected, the word hung in the air. From whom? From what? The unspoken answer, I realized with a cold dread, was from myself. This was the fault line. This moment, right here in the quiet living room, with the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. On one side was my life with Robert, built on love and mutual respect. On the other was this new, terrifying reality where my competence was being gently, politely questioned. The memory came to me then, unbidden, sharp as a shard of glass. It was from a few years ago. Robert and I were in this very room, and Mark had been over for dinner. There'd been a discussion about a business venture of Mark's, one that required a significant loan. Robert, ever the cautious man, had hesitated. "Come on, Dad," Mark had said, a edge of frustration in his voice. "It's my inheritance one way or another, right? Why not let me use it to build something now?" Robert's face had gone still. "Mark, what Ruth and I have is ours, our life, our security. Your inheritance is what remains after I have taken my last breath on this earth, and it is not a topic for negotiation." There had been a tension in the room that night, a flash of something hard in Mark's eyes before he masked it with a joke and changed the subject. I'd mentioned it to Robert later, in bed. "He's just ambitious," Robert had sighed, rubbing his temples. "He gets that from his mother. But he has to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. Now, sitting across from that ambitious son, I understood what Robert had been shielding me from. Mark saw me not as a stepmother, not as a person, but as an obstacle. A placeholder between him and what he believed was rightfully his. "I'll think about it, Mark," I said finally, my voice thin. "That's all I ask," he said, standing up. He patted my shoulder on his way out. A patronizing, dismissive gesture. "You just take care of yourself, Ruth. Let me handle the heavy lifting." After he left, the silence descended again, but it was different now. It was no longer just the silence of absence, it was the silence of a threat. I walked over to Robert's chair and placed my hand on the headrest where Mark's head had just been. The leather was still warm. I looked around the room, at the photographs on the mantel. There we were, Robert and I, on our wedding day. Me, a blushing 3-3-year-old, him a handsome 4-5-year-old with a touch of silver at his temples, his eyes crinkled with joy. There was a picture of us on a beach in Maine, windswept and happy. And there was a picture of Mark, as a boy, with Robert, both of them holding up a fish. A family. We were supposed to be a family. Auntie Grace called later that evening, her voice a lifeline. "How's my girl today?" I tried to sound normal. "I'm okay, Grace." Mark stopped by. There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. "Oh? And how was the esteemed Mr. Mark?" I relayed the conversation, my words tumbling out now, laced with the anxiety I'd held back in his presence. When I finished, Grace let out a long, slow breath. "Ruth, my love, you listen to your Auntie Grace. That boy, that man, is circling. He's like a hawk looking at a mouse in a field. You be careful, your Robert left you provided for. He was a smart, careful man. He wouldn't have left you adrift. But he made it sound like I'm not capable. Like I'm some frail, confused widow." Pish-posh, I could almost see her waving a dismissive hand. "You are Ruth Ann Miller. You ran a household, you supported a husband, you have more sense in your little finger than that entitled, oh, I shouldn't say it, just, be careful. And for heaven's sake, don't you sign anything he puts in front of you." I hung up, feeling slightly better, but Grace's warning echoed Mark's own words, just from a different angle. People who would see a woman in your position as an easy target. Was I an easy target? Grief had sanded me down to my rawest nerves. I felt fragile, uncertain. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe I was in over my head. His doubt, was a seed, and he had planted it deep in the fertile soil of my sorrow. That night, I didn't just miss Robert, I ached for him. I needed his strength, his calm certainty. I needed him to walk through the door, hang his coat on the hook, and tell me everything was going to be all right. But the hook was empty, and the silence was now filled with a low, insistent whisper of fear. The foundation of my life, the one I thought was built on solid rock, had just developed a hairline crack, and I was terrified of how wide it might split. The seed of doubt Mark planted didn't sprint to a weed overnight. It was subtler than that, more insidious. It was a vine, creeping in slowly, wrapping itself around my confidence, my sense of self, until I started to see the world through the distorted lens he was holding up for me. It began with little things. A week after his visit, a handyman showed up at my door, a cheerful fellow with a tool belt and a clipboard. "Mr. Patterson sent me," he said, beaming. "Said you've got a leaky faucet in the guest bath and the gutters need cleaning." I was taken aback. I had mentioned the drip, drip, drip to Mark in passing, more as a shared annoyance than a plea for help. And the gutters, well, they were on my mental to-do list. Mark shouldn't have. I started, but the handyman was already stepping inside, his heavy boots on the welcome mat Robert had bought on a trip to Vermont. "It's no trouble, ma'am. We'll get you all sorted," Mr. Patterson said to put it on his account. His account. The words made me feel like a child. I stood there, useless, as he marched through my house, assessing, diagnosing. He fixed the faucet, yes. He cleared the gutters. But he also left a bill, tucked under a magnet on the refrigerator. A bill addressed to me. It felt like a violation, a reminder that I was now the one responsible for these mundane, yet suddenly monumental, tasks. I called Mark to thank him, my voice tight. "Think nothing of it, Ruth," he said smoothly. "I could tell it was stressing you out. You have enough on your plate. Just let me handle these little things." They weren't little things. They were my things. My responsibilities. But with each one he handled, I felt a little smaller, a little more incapable. Then came the financial help. He started calling every Sunday evening, his check-in calls. "Just wanted to make sure you got the statement from the investment firm," he'd say. "It can look like gibberish if you're not used to it. Did you see the dip in the tech sector? Don't worry, it's normal, but we might want to think about moving some of those more volatile assets into something more stable. For your security." I'd hold the phone to my ear, staring at the complex columns of numbers on the statement in front of me. It did look like gibberish. Robert had always summarized it for me, his hand covering mine. "We're doing just fine, my love, no worries." Now, the raw data felt alien and threatening. "What do you think we should do, Mark?" I'd ask, hating the helplessness in my voice. "I think a conservative reallocation is in order. I can talk to the financial advisor, if you'd like. I know him well. He and Dad were close." So, he started talking to David, our financial advisor. Then, the statements started coming with sticky notes attached, in Mark's handwriting. "Ruth, see here. This is the bond fund I mentioned. Safe as houses. Ruth, this fee is too high. I've asked David to look into it." He was slowly, methodically, inserting himself as the intermediary between me and my own life. He was becoming the gatekeeper of my reality. The breaking point, the moment the vine tightened and I couldn't breathe, was the incident with the car. My old sedan, a faithful companion for a decade, was making a funny noise. I took it to our longtime mechanic, Joe. Joe, who had patched up this car and all of Robert's before him, took it for a spin. "Sounds like the transmission, Ruth," he said, wiping his hands on a greasy rag. "It's not great news. Probably a $3,000 fix. To be honest, on a car this age, you might be better off putting that money towards a new one." My heart sank. $3,000. A new car? The thought was overwhelming. I must have mentioned it to Mark in one of our calls, my voice thick with stress. A few days later, he showed up at my door again, this time with a sleek, silver SUV parked in my driveway. "Early birthday present," he said, dangling the keys. I stared at him, then at the car. It was huge, shiny, and intimidating. "Mark, I can't accept this. This is too much." "Nonsense," he said, pressing the keys into my hand. "That old death trap of yours is a liability. What if you broke down on the highway? I'd never forgive myself. This is safe. It's reliable. I've already taken care of the insurance, everything. All you have to do is drive it. All you have to do is drive it." Like I was a teenager being given her first set of keys. The gesture was grand, but the message was devastating. You are not capable of making a major decision for yourself. You cannot be trusted to choose your own mode of transportation. I must do it for you. I took the keys. What else could I do? To refuse would have seemed ungrateful, churlish. He had backed me into a corner with the appearance of generosity. That night, I called Auntie Clara. Grace was all warmth and sympathy, but Clara was made of sterner stuff. She didn't suffer fools, and right now, I was feeling like the biggest fool of all. I told her about the car, my voice shaking with a mixture of shame and rage. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, Clara's voice, crisp and clear as a winter morning. "Ruth, he's building a case." "A case? A case for what?" "A case that you are incompetent, that you can't manage your own affairs, that you make poor decisions under stress. He's creating a paper trail. The handyman bill for a simple repair you couldn't handle, the financial advice you need. Now, a car he had to buy for you because yours was unsafe. He's documenting your every perceived weakness." The room tilted. The web I hadn't even seen was now laid bare, its sticky strands glistening in the light of Clara's cold, hard wisdom. "But why?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. Why? Clara snorted. The house, Ruth. The investments. The life insurance. Your Robert was a very successful man. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Mark doesn't want to wait for you to die of old age to get his hands on it. He wants control. Now. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and sharp. What do I do, Clara? You stop being a mouse, she said, her voice softening just a fraction. You start being a lioness. You take back your life. You cancel his access to your financial advisor. You send him a check for the damn car. You change the locks if you have to. You show him that Ruth Ann Miller is not someone he can manipulate. But I felt like a mouse. A small, frightened mouse caught in a web woven by a spider who called me family. Hanging up the phone, I looked out the window at the silver SUV. It sat in my driveway, a monument not to generosity, but to my own subjugation. It was the shiniest cage I'd ever seen, and I was the bird who had willingly, gratefully, stepped inside. The silver SUV sat in my driveway like a spaceship that had landed from a planet called Condescension. Every time I looked at it, a fresh wave of humiliation washed over me. Clara's words echoed in my mind. You send him a check for the damn car. It was the only way to reclaim even a shred of dignity. Sitting at Robert's old desk, my desk, I wrote the check. My hand trembled, making the numbers look wobbly. It was a significant amount of money, enough to make my stomach clench. But the thought of owing Mark anything, of being indebted to his generosity, was worse. I put it in an envelope, wrote his name on it, and left it on the hall table, a tiny act of defiance that felt as monumental as moving a mountain. Next, I called David, the financial advisor. My heart was pounding. I'd always been friendly with David, but he was Robert's friend first, and now, it seemed, Mark's collaborator. David, it's Ruth Patterson, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Ruth, how are you? Mark was just telling me about getting you into that new Highlander. Wonderful, safe car. The mention of it, from him, felt like a betrayal. Yes, David, I'm calling to make a change. I'd like you to remove Mark Patterson from any and all authorizations on my accounts. From now on, all communications and decisions go through me, and me alone. The silence on the other end was profound. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. Ruth, are you sure? Mark has just been trying to help navigate all this. It's a complex portfolio. I am sure, I said, my voice firmer now. Please make the change effective immediately. And, David, I'd appreciate it if you did not discuss my financial affairs with my stepson anymore. That is a private matter. Of course, Ruth, he said, his tone now cool, professional. I'll process that right away. I hung up, my entire body trembling with adrenaline. I had done it. I had pushed back. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of the woman I used to be. The backlash was not long in coming. Mark showed up 2 days later, and this time there was no smile. He didn't bother with the pretense of a doorbell. I heard his key in the lock. He still had a key, and he walked right in, his face a thundercloud. Ruth, he said, his voice low and tight. What is this? He threw the envelope with the cash check onto the kitchen counter. Then he slapped a printed email next to it. It was from David, informing him that his authorization had been revoked. I don't understand, he said, but his eyes said he understood perfectly. After everything I've done to help you, to protect you. Is this about the car? I was trying to keep you safe. This isn't about the car, Mark, I said, crossing my arms over my chest, a feeble attempt to shield myself. This is about you treating me like I've lost my mind. I am not incompetent. I am grieving, but I am not a child. Really? He shot back, a cruel sneer twisting his lips. It was a side of him I'd only glimpsed before. Because from where I'm standing, you're making some very irrational decisions. Cutting off the people who care about you, refusing help? Do you have any idea what you're doing to Dad's estate? That money was meant to be a legacy, not for you to fritter away because you're lonely and confused. Each word was a punch, irrational. Fritter away, lonely, confused. He was using my grief as a weapon. I am not confused, I said, my voice shaking. I am your stepmother, and you will not speak to me this way in my home. I want you to leave. Your home? He let out a harsh laugh. This was my father's home. Everything in it was his. You walked into his life 20 years ago, and now you think you can just shut his own son out. His blood? The venom in his words stole my breath. This was the truth he had been hiding all along. To him, I was an interloper. A gold digger who had stolen his father and was now stealing his inheritance. Get out, Mark, I whispered, my strength failing. Fine, he spat. But this isn't over. You are clearly not in your right mind. You're making decisions that are against your own best interests. And as my father's son, I have a moral obligation to protect his legacy, even from you. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall rattled. I sank into a chair, my legs giving way. The confrontation had left me hollowed out and terrified. Moral obligation. The phrase was a threat, a promise. I called Auntie Grace. Sobbing, she was at my door in 20 minutes, holding me while I cried, making me tea that I couldn't drink. "Oh, my sweet girl," she murmured, stroking my hair. "That horrible, horrible boy. Robert would be so ashamed." But it was Auntie Clara, when I called her later, who named the beast. "He's going to file for conservatorship, Ruth," she said, her voice grim. "Or something like it. He's going to go to a court and try to have you declared mentally incompetent so he can take control of everything." The world swam before my eyes. "He can't do that, can he?" "He can try," Clara said. "And he will. He's laid the groundwork. The handyman, the financial advisor, the car. He'll have a list of evidence of your declining capacity. He'll get a doctor to say you're fragile from grief. He'll paint a picture of a helpless, confused widow being taken advantage of by herself. The absurdity of it was paralyzing. I was the threat to myself. My own autonomy was the danger from which he needed to save me. The next few weeks were a slow-motion nightmare. I became a prisoner in my own home, jumping at every sound, terrified every time the phone rang. I stopped answering calls from numbers I didn't recognize. I saw Mark's car parked down the street sometimes, just sitting there, watching. The final blow came on a Tuesday. The doorbell rang, and through the glass I saw a man in a suit holding a large envelope. My blood ran cold. I knew, with a certainty that felt like a death sentence, what it was. I opened the door. "Ruth Patterson?" he asked. "Yes, you've been served." He handed me the thick envelope. The paper felt heavy, toxic. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart hammering against my ribs. With trembling fingers, I tore it open. The words swam on the page, legal jargon that was nonetheless brutally clear. In the matter of the guardianship of Ruth Ann Patterson, petition for appointment of a limited guardian. Alleged incapacitated person. Alleged incapacitated person. That was me. The petition, filed by Mark Patterson, alleged that I was suffering from severe grief and depression leading to impaired judgment, that I was making financially irresponsible decisions, that I was unable to manage my own property, affairs, and that I was susceptible to undue influence. It listed his evidence: my resistance to necessary home repairs, my irrational dismissal of a trusted financial advisor, my paranoid behavior, and my isolation from family. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. Every act of my defiance, every attempt to reclaim my independence, had been twisted into a symptom of my madness. And then I saw the name he had proposed to be my guardian, the person who would have total control over my finances, my home, my life: Mark Patterson. I slid down the door to the floor, the cold hardwood pressing against my legs. The papers fanned out around me like fallen leaves. This was it. He had made it official. He was trying to use the power of the state to strip me of my personhood, to reduce me to a legal entity that he would own and operate. The silence of the house was no longer just the absence of Robert. It was the silence of a tomb. I was 53 years old, and my own family was trying to bury me alive. The unraveling was complete. All that was left was the frayed, broken end of the life I thought I had. I don't know how long I sat on that floor, the cold from the wood seeping into my bones. It could have been minutes. It could have been an hour. Time had lost all meaning. I was just a vessel, filled to the brim with a cold, black despair. The legal papers were a physical weight, their words branded onto the inside of my eyelids. Alleged incapacitated person. The phrase was a shackle. The doorbell rang again. A shrill, intrusive sound that jolted me back into my body. Panic, sharp and acidic, rose in my throat. Was it another process server? A reporter? Had Mark sent someone to check on his incapacitated stepmother? I scrambled to my knees, peering through the keyhole. I saw a flash of vibrant fuchsia and a familiar, sturdy pair of walking shoes. Auntie Grace. And beside her, a taller, more angular silhouette in a sensible taupe trench coat. Auntie Clara. A sob, half relief, half humiliation, escaped my lips. I fumbled with the lock and pulled the door open. The look on their faces told me everything. Grace's eyes, usually twinkling with kindness, were wide with alarm and instantly filled with tears. Clara's sharp features were set in a mask of grim fury. They had heard. Of course, they had heard. In our family, bad news traveled at the speed of light. "Oh, my baby," Grace whispered, and she swept into the house, pulling me into a hug that smelled of lavender and unconditional love. I collapsed against her, the dam breaking, my body racked with ugly, shuddering sobs. Clara stepped inside, closed the door firmly behind her, and locked it. She didn't say a word. She bent down and began gathering the scattered legal papers, her movements precise and efficient. She stacked them neatly, her eyes scanning the first page. I saw her jaw tighten, a muscle ticking in her cheek. Grace led me to the sofa, holding me like a child. Clara came and sat in the armchair opposite, placing the stack of papers on the coffee table as if it were a contaminated object. "Tell us," Clara said, her voice low and steady, and I did. I told them everything, from the first helpful visit to the final, devastating service of the petition. I told them about the handyman, the financial advisor, the SUV, the confrontation. The words poured out of me, a toxic flood of fear and shame. When I finished, there was a heavy silence. Grace was crying softly, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Clara was perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the papers. "Well," Clara said finally, the single word dripping with ice. "He's a more thorough little weasel than I gave him credit for." A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. "What am I going to do, Clara?" "He's going to take everything. He's going to have me declared insane. He is going to try," Clara corrected, looking directly at me. Her eyes, a steely gray, were like lasers. "But he has not succeeded yet. Right now, Ruth, you have a choice. You can lie down on these expensive hardwood floors and let him walk all over you, or you can stand up and fight." "How?" I wailed, the helplessness overwhelming me again. "It's his word against mine. He has evidence. He's a successful businessman, and I'm just a grieving widow." "You are Ruth Ann Miller," Clara said, her voice rising for the first time. "And you are not just anything. Your father was a steel worker who never bowed his head to anyone. Your mother survived breast cancer with a smile on her face. You come from a line of fighters, and I will not sit here and watch you surrender to that product of mediocre sperm." Grace gasped. "Clara." "It's true," Clara snapped. "Robert was a good man, but his first wife was a piece of work, and she spoiled that boy rotten. He's a bully. And bullies only understand one thing, force. But the law," I gestured weakly to the papers. "The law is not magic," Clara said. "It's a tool. And right now, Mark is trying to use that tool to build a cage for you. We are going to take that tool out of his hands and beat him over the head with it." For the first time since the envelope had been thrust into my hands, I felt a spark. A tiny, fragile flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to breathe through the panic. "What's the first step?" I asked, my voice raspy. "The first step," Clara said, "is we get you a lawyer. Not some friendly family attorney, a shark, a barracuda, someone who specializes in fighting these kinds of predatory petitions." "That will cost a fortune," I whispered. "And how much will it cost you if you lose?" Clara countered. "Your home, your freedom, your dignity. We will find the money. We will mortgage our own houses if we have to." She looked at Grace, who nodded firmly, her tears now replaced by a look of fierce determination. "The second step," Clara continued, "is we start building our own case. We go on the offensive. We document everything, every interaction, every phone call. We find witnesses to your sanity. We get our own doctors to evaluate you. We turn his evidence on its head." "How?" "That handyman," Clara said. "We get a statement from him that you were perfectly coherent and that Mark hired him without your full consent. That financial advisor? We subpoena his records to show Mark was pressuring him. That car? We prove it was an unsolicited gift, a tool of control, not a necessity. We show the court that Mark is the one behaving irrationally and exploitatively. It was a blueprint for war." And looking at my two aunts, One a soft-hearted strategist and the other a hard-nosed general, I realized I was not alone in this fight. I had an army. "The third step," Grace said, speaking for the first time, her voice soft but unwavering, "is we take care of you. You are going to eat. You are going to sleep. You are going to remember who you are. We are not going to let him steal your spirit, Ruth. That does not belong to him." That night they stayed. Grace cooked a robust stew, and though I had no appetite, I ate it under her watchful eye. Clara commandeered Robert's desk, making lists, drawing up a battle plan on a yellow legal pad. I went to bed exhausted, but the crushing weight had lessened, just a little. The tomb was no longer sealed shut. My aunts had pried open a crack, and a sliver of light, the light of fight, was shining through. As I lay in the dark, I thought of Robert, not the sick, fading man, but the strong, vibrant one I'd married. What would he want me to do? Would he want me to crumble? To let his son dismantle the life we built together? A memory surfaced, clear and bright. We were on that beach in Maine, the one in the photograph. A storm was rolling in, and the waves were crashing violently against the rocks. I'd been nervous, wanting to go back to the inn. Robert had put his arm around me, his voice calm and sure against the wind. "Look at that, Ruth," he'd said, pointing to a lone pine tree clinging to the cliffside, bent and twisted by decades of nor'easters. "That tree doesn't run from the storm. It digs its roots in deeper. It learns to bend so it doesn't break. That's strength. That's survival." I had been bending for months, bending under the weight of grief, bending under the pressure of Mark's manipulation. I had bent so far I was nearly broken. But I wasn't broken yet. Lying there in the dark, I made a promise to myself, to Robert, to my aunts. I would dig my roots in deeper. I would stop bending. I would stand. Mark Patterson had declared war on me. And for the first time, I felt ready to fight back. The alleged incapacitated person was about to become the undeniable force. Clara was true to her word. Within 48 hours, I was sitting in a sleek, modern office high above the city, a glass of water in my hand that I was too nervous to drink. The view was breathtaking, a panorama of gleaming buildings and winding rivers, but it only made me feel smaller, more out of place. "Eleanor Vance will see you now," a crisp, young assistant said. I stood, my knees feeling like jelly. Clara, who had insisted on coming with me, gave my arm a firm, bracing squeeze. "Remember," she whispered, "you are the client. You are hiring her." We walked into an office that was all sharp angles, minimalist furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows. Behind a vast, glass-topped desk sat a woman who looked like she'd been carved from marble. She was probably in her late 40s, with a severe, elegant blonde bob and a black suit that screamed both expense and authority. She did not smile. "Mrs. Patterson," she said, rising and offering a hand. Her grip was firm, brief. "I'm Eleanor Vance, and you must be Clara." She nodded at my aunt, her gaze appraising. "Please, sit." Saturday, I felt like a schoolgirl in the principal's office. "Clara has given me a brief overview," Eleanor began, steepling her fingers. "But I need to hear it from you, Ruth. From the beginning. Leave nothing out. The little things are often the most important." So, I told my story again. It was becoming a practiced recitation, but this time, in this sterile, powerful space, the words felt more real, more dangerous. I told her about the seed of doubt, the vine of control, the web of manipulation, and the final, legal blow. Eleanor listened, utterly still, her blue eyes fixed on me. She didn't interrupt, didn't react. She just absorbed. When I finished, she was silent for a full minute, looking from me to the copy of the petition she had on her desk. "Okay," she said finally, leaning forward. The word was a catalyst. This is what we're facing. This is a petition for guardianship, specifically a limited guardian of the person and estate. If granted, Mark would have the legal authority to make all financial and major life decisions for you. Where you live, what medical care you receive, how you spend your money. It is a draconian measure reserved for individuals with severe dementia or profound mental illness who are a direct danger to themselves. But I'm not, I started. I know you're not, she interrupted, not unkindly. But the court doesn't. The court only sees what is presented. And your stepson has presented a compelling, if fraudulent, narrative. He's smart. He's not claiming you're raving mad. He's using culturally accepted vulnerabilities, the hysterical widow, the financially ignorant woman, the fragile griever. It's a stereotype, and he's wielding it like a weapon. Hearing her articulate it so clinically made my skin crawl. Can he win? I asked, the core question I was terrified to voice. He can, she said, her gaze unwavering. These petitions are granted more often than you'd think, especially when filed by a family member and supported by documented evidence. The court tends to err on the side of so-called protection. The room seemed to tilt. Clara reached over and grabbed my hand. However, Eleanor continued, a sharp predatory glint entering her eyes. However, his case is built on a house of cards. It relies on your compliance, your silence, and the absence of a robust defense. We are going to provide all three. We are going to blow his house down. She picked up a pen. Our strategy is three-pronged. First, we demolish his evidence. We will depose the handyman, the financial advisor. We will subpoena Mark's own financial records. I want to see if he has debts, if he's been counting on this inheritance. We will reframe every single one of his kind gestures as acts of coercive control. The car was the worst, I murmured. The car is a gift, Eleanor said flatly. An unsolicited gift is not evidence of incapacity, it's evidence of the giver's intent. We will have an auto expert testify that your old car was in fact perfectly safe. We will make that SUV look like what it is, a Trojan horse. I felt a jolt of energy. She was already dismantling Mark's narrative. The second prong, she said, is we build an irrefutable case for your competence. We will have you evaluated by a top-tier forensic psychiatrist. We will get affidavits from your friends, your doctor, your neighbors, anyone who has interacted with you recently and can attest to your sound mind. We will create a mountain of evidence so high he cannot climb over it. She turned to a fresh page on her legal pad. The third prong is the most important. We go on the attack. We file a countersuit. A countersuit? I asked, bewildered. For what? For abuse of process, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. For intentional infliction of emotional distress. We sue him for maliciously using the legal system to harass and oppress you. We turn the tables. We make him the defendant. We show the court that this isn't about protecting you. It's about a greedy, manipulative son trying to steal from his stepmother. The audacity of it took my breath away. I had come here hoping to defend myself. Eleanor Vance was talking about launching a full-scale invasion. It's aggressive, she said, noting my expression. It's expensive, and it will make him furious. But it is the only way to truly win. A simple defense might get the petition dismissed. An aggressive counterattack will expose him for what he is and potentially make him liable for all our legal fees, plus damages. It sends a message: if you come for Ruth Patterson, you will get your hand bitten off. Clara let out a sound that was half gasp, half chuckle. I like you, she said to Eleanor. Eleanor almost smiled. It was a small, sharp movement. The feeling is mutual. Now, Ruth. This is your life. This is your fight. Are you prepared to do this? It will be grueling. He will throw everything he has at you. You will have to sit in a deposition and be questioned for hours. You will have to relive the worst moments of your grief. It will be ugly. I looked from Eleanor's fierce, determined face to Clara's proud, supportive one. I thought of Grace, at home probably baking me a cake filled with love and strength. I thought of Robert, of our life, of the home we'd built. I thought of Mark, sitting in our chair, talking about his moral obligation. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But it was now joined by something else, something hotter and sharper. Anger. Righteous, blazing anger. I looked Eleanor Vance directly in the eye. I'm prepared, I said, and my voice did not shake. Let's go to war. War, I quickly learned, is fought with paper. Endless, suffocating reams of it. The weeks that followed were a blur of document requests, interrogatories, and evidence gathering. My life was being picked apart, every financial transaction, every medical checkup, every personal correspondence laid bare for legal scrutiny. It was a profound violation, but Eleanor assured me it was necessary. We have to know what they have before they know we have it, she'd say, a legal general preparing for battle. Mark's side, led by a slick, smarmy attorney named Mr. Dalton, was equally relentless. They demanded my therapy records from after Robert's death. They subpoenaed my phone records to see who I was talking to. They asked for every receipt for every purchase over $100 for the past year, trying to paint a picture of a woman frittering away her husband's fortune. I felt like I was living under a microscope, my every move judged and found wanting. But we were fighting back. Our forensic psychiatrist, a no-nonsense woman named Dr. Evans, spent 4 hours with me. We talked about Robert, about my grief, about Mark, about my childhood, my hopes, my fears. At the end, she sat back and said, "Ruth, you are experiencing a normal, healthy grieving process. Your judgment is sound, your cognitive functions are excellent for your age, and your decision to resist your stepson's control is not only rational, it's a sign of remarkable strength." Her report was a 20-page demolition of Mark's incapacity claims. We also started gathering our affidavits. My longtime family doctor wrote a glowing testament to my mental and physical health. My neighbor, Sarah, wrote about how I'd helped her with her own mother's estate, showing clarity and organization. The manager at the local grocery store, whom I'd known for years, even wrote a statement saying I was always pleasant, sharp, and knew my own mind. Each affidavit was a brick in the wall we were building around me, a wall Mark was going to find impossible to breach. But the most shocking discovery happened not in a lawyer's office or a doctor's clinic, but in my own basement. It was a Saturday. Clara had come over, insisting we do a deep dive into Robert's old filing cabinets. "There might be something in there," she'd said. "A receipt, an old letter, anything that shows Robert's intent, that shows you were a full partner." The basement was cool and smelled of damp concrete and memories. Robert's filing cabinets were massive, metal behemoths from a bygone era. We started with the one labeled, "Taxes, Old." It was mind-numbing work. Receipts from appliances bought in the 90 seconds, old insurance policies for cars long since scrapped, faded bank statements. We were about to give up, my back aching from hunching over, when Clara let out a sharp exclamation. "Ruth, look at this." She was holding a thick, legal-sized envelope. It was tucked behind a stack of old mutual fund annual reports. It was unmarked, but it felt heavy, important. "What is it?" I asked, coming to stand beside her. She opened the clasp and pulled out a sheaf of papers. On top was a cover letter from a law firm I didn't recognize, not our usual family lawyer. The date was just over a year ago, 6 months before Robert was diagnosed. The letter was addressed to Robert. It began, "Pursuant to our discussion, enclosed, please find the executed last will and testament, revoking all previous versions." My heart stopped. A new will? He'd made a new will and hadn't told me? With trembling hands, I took the document from Clara. I skimmed the legalese, my eyes searching for the pertinent parts. And then I found it. The section on the executor. Asterisk, "I hereby appoint my beloved wife, Ruhan Patterson, as the sole executrix of my estate." That was expected, but it was the next clause that made the blood drain from my face. Asterisk, "In the event that my wife, Ruth Anna Patterson, is unable or unwilling to serve, I appoint my sister-in-law, Clara Miller, as successor executrix." Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. He named me. I kept reading, my heart hammering against my ribs. The will was straightforward. I was the primary beneficiary, inheriting the house, all joint accounts, and the bulk of his estate, but there was a specific, separate clause regarding Mark. Asterisk, "For my son, Mark Patterson, I leave the sum of $100,000 to be paid from my estate within 60 days of my passing. I have provided for Mark throughout his life, and am confident this final bequest is both fair and sufficient." $100,000. It was a significant amount of money, but it was a fraction, a tiny fraction, of the estate's total value. Robert had left him a specific, defined amount, not a percentage, not a share of the house, a set sum. And then, the final, earth-shattering clause. It was titled, "No Contest Clause." Asterisk, "Should any beneficiary under this will, including my son, Mark Patterson, initiate or pursue any legal proceeding to challenge the validity of this will or any of its provisions, then that beneficiary shall be deemed to have predeceased me, and shall forfeit any and all bequests made to them herein." I read it twice, 3 times, not quite believing what I was seeing. It was a poison pill, a legal trap. If Mark challenged the will, he would get nothing, not even the $100,000. "Clara," I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of awe and fury. He knew. Robert knew. Clara took the document from me, her eyes scanning the lines. "He must have seen the writing on the wall," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He knew what Mark was capable of. He was protecting you. Until the very end, he was protecting you." Tears streamed down my face, hot and fast. They were tears of grief for the husband I missed so desperately. They were tears of rage for the son who had proven his father's fears right. And they were tears of vindication. This single document, hidden in a basement cabinet, was a weapon of mass destruction. It was the truth, in Robert's own hand, about what he wanted, about who he trusted, and about the son he felt he needed to protect himself from. We took the will upstairs and called Eleanor Vance immediately. I held the phone to my ear, the precious papers clutched to my chest. "Eleanor," I said when she answered. "You need to come to my house, right now." "What is it, Ruth?" she asked, her voice alert. "We found something," I said, a strange, fierce calm settling over me. "We found Robert's last will. The real one." The silence on the other end was profound. Then, I heard what sounded like a low chuckle. "Read me the no contest clause," she said. I did. When I finished, there was another pause. "Well," Eleanor Vance said, her voice dripping with a kind of savage joy. "Game over." Holding that newel felt like holding a live wire. It hummed with potential energy, with the power to obliterate Mark's entire case in an instant. The urge to call him, to fax it to his lawyer, to scream its contents from the rooftop was almost overwhelming. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized he had not only lost, but that his own father had seen him coming from a mile away. But Eleanor Vance was a strategist, not a brawler. "Patience, Ruth," she counseled over the speakerphone in her office, Clara and I sitting like eager acolytes. "Right now, this is our nuclear option. We don't deploy it in the opening skirmish. We let them commit. We let them spend their money, invest their ego, and dig their hole even deeper. Then, and only then, do we reveal the trapdoor beneath their feet." It was diabolical. It was brilliant. So, we entered a strange, suspended period. The legal machinery ground on, but now, for me, it was background noise. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, simmering anticipation. I was no longer the prey. I was the hunter laying in wait. We continued to respond to Dalton's requests, but now with a new confidence. When they demanded an inventory of all the artwork in the house, implying I might sell it off recklessly, Eleanor provided a meticulously itemized list, adding, "My client is considering bequeathing several pieces to the local art museum, in accordance with her and her late husband's long-standing philanthropic interests." I could almost hear Dalton sputtering on the other end. We scheduled my deposition. This was a key part of Mark's strategy to get me under oath, flustered and emotional, and trip me up. The night before, I could barely sleep. Eleanor came to my house and we practiced for hours. "They will try to provoke you," she warned. "They will call you hysterical. They will imply you trapped Robert into marriage. They will suggest you are a gold digger. You must not react. You must be calm, clear, and factual. You are not on trial. You are telling your story." The deposition was held in a sterile conference room at Dalton's firm. Mark was there, sitting across the table from me. He didn't look at me, just stared at a point on the wall behind my head, a smug, detached expression on his face. Mr. Dalton, a man with a too-perfect tan and overly white teeth, began his questioning. It started gently, lulling me. My name, my age, the date of my marriage to Robert. Then it began to tighten. "Would you describe your relationship with your stepson as close, Mrs. Patterson?" "It was cordial," I said, my voice even. "Cordial?" He refers to you as Mom in several birthday cards entered into evidence. That was his choice. I never asked him to. After your husband's death, did you make any effort to include Mark in financial decisions? The decisions were mine to make, I said. As my husband's widow, but you admit you have no formal financial training. I have a lifetime of experience managing a household and working alongside my husband. He shifted tactics. Is it true you suffered a nervous breakdown after Mr. Patterson's death? I suffered profound grief, I corrected him, as any loving spouse would. I sought counseling, which my doctor encouraged. That is a sign of health, not illness. He kept pushing, his voice taking on a nastier edge. Did you ever feel that marrying Robert Patterson was your ticket to a lifestyle you could never have achieved on your own? Eleanor Vance cut in, her voice like a whip crack. Objection. Argumentative. Instruct the witness not to answer. I didn't answer, but I looked directly at Mark for the first time. A faint flush was creeping up his neck. The questions came faster, more aggressive. About the car, the financial advisor, the handyman. Each time, I held my ground, repeating the facts Eleanor and I had rehearsed. I was calm, I was clear, I was factual. Then Dalton played his trump card, or what he thought was his trump card. Mrs. Patterson, is it not true that you have been secretly funneling money from your joint accounts into a private account in your name only? I was stunned. It was a complete lie. That is absolutely not true. We have records showing several large transfers, he insisted, sliding a piece of paper toward me. I looked at it. It was a statement from one of our investment accounts. There were indeed several transfers, totaling almost $50,000, to an account with a number I didn't recognize. My mind raced. And then I remembered. A month before he died, Robert had been very insistent we set up a new, high-yield online savings account. For a rainy day, Ruth. Just for us. He'd handled it all himself, wanting to surprise me with the interest rate. I had completely forgotten about it. The account was in both our names. I looked up at Dalton, and then at Mark, who was now watching me, a tiny, triumphant smile playing on his lips. They thought they had me. They thought this was the smoking gun, proof of my financial deceit. I took a slow, deep breath. That account, I said, my voice perfectly steady, is a joint account my husband opened for us. The login information is in his office. I suggest you check your facts before making baseless accusations. The smile vanished from Mark's face. The flush on his neck deepened to a blotchy red. Dalton looked flustered, shuffling his papers. The deposition ended not long after. I had held my ground. I had not broken. As we packed up to leave, Mark stood and walked toward the door. He paused next to my chair. "You think you're so clever," he hissed, his voice low so only I could hear. "But this isn't over. I will have what is rightfully mine." I looked up at him, and for the first time, I felt not fear, but pity. Pity for the small, greedy man his father had tried, and failed, to raise. "It was never yours, Mark," I said quietly, "and it never will be." Walking out of that building with Eleanor and Clara, I felt lighter than I had in a year. The storm was coming, I could feel it in the air. But I was no longer afraid of the rain. I had an umbrella, forged in my husband's love and hidden in a basement filing cabinet, and I was ready for the downpour. The letter from Mr. Dalton arrived a week after the deposition. It was formal, printed on heavy, cream-colored stock. Eleanor called me as soon as she received her copy. "They're waving the white flag," she said, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "Or at least, they're pretending to." The letter was a without prejudice settlement offer. It was a masterpiece of legal spin. It stated that Mark, wishing to avoid the further emotional and financial strain of protracted litigation on the family, was willing to drop his petition for guardianship. In return, he asked that I do the right thing and agree to a fair and equitable distribution of Robert's estate. Specifically, that the house be sold and the proceeds split 50-50, and that the investment portfolio be divided similarly. He was offering to stop trying to have me declared insane if I would just hand over half of everything. When Clara read it, she let out a bark of laughter that held no humor. The arrogance, the sheer, unmitigated gall. He tries to destroy you, fails, and then has the nerve to ask for half of what he just tried to steal? "It's a classic tactic," Eleanor explained, her voice calm. "He knows his case is weak. The deposition didn't go the way he planned. You were a compelling witness. He's hoping you're tired, that you'll take this deal just to make it all go away. He's betting your desire for peace is greater than your desire for justice." Peace. The word sounded so foreign, so unattainable. To have the lawsuits gone, the pressure lifted, the fear erased, it was a seductive thought. I could sell the house. God knows it held as many painful memories now as happy ones. I could take the money, buy a small condo, travel, try to find some semblance of a life again. I would be comfortable. I would be free of him. But then I thought of Robert. I thought of him sitting at this very desk, secretly drafting a new will to protect me. I thought of the specific, deliberate bequest of $100,000. He didn't want Mark to have half. He didn't want him to have the house he'd lovingly maintained. He wanted me to have it all, because he trusted me to be the steward of our shared life. To take this deal would be to spit on Robert's final wishes. And more than that, it would be a victory for Mark. He would walk away with millions of dollars that he had done nothing to earn and everything to deserve. He would have bullied and manipulated his way to a fortune. There would be no consequence for the terror he had put me through, for the way he had weaponized my grief. He would learn that this behavior worked. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "No deal." Eleanor was silent for a moment. "I need to be clear, Ruth. If we reject this and move forward, we are going to trial. It will be public. It will be brutal. He will throw every piece of mud he can find." "I know," I said. "But if I say yes, I'll never be able to look at myself in the mirror again. He doesn't want peace, he wants a payout. And I am not going to fund his betrayal." "Okay then," Eleanor said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "In that case, we have a little surprise for Mr. Dalton." We scheduled a meeting for the following Monday in Eleanor's office. She instructed Mr. Dalton to bring his client. "We have a counter-proposal to discuss," was all she said. The day of the meeting, I dressed with care. I wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress. Pearls Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary, and low heels. I looked like what I was, a respectable, composed, capable woman. Not a fragile, incapacitated widow. Clara and Grace came with me, my army. We sat on one side of the table in Eleanor's conference room. When Mark and Mr. Dalton walked in, they seemed confident, almost smug. They thought we were here to negotiate. Pleasantries were exchanged, brittle and fake. Mark barely glanced at me. "Well, Mr. Dalton began, opening his leather portfolio. "We're glad you were willing to meet. We believe our offer is more than generous, given the circumstances. It allows Mrs. Patterson to maintain a more than comfortable lifestyle while acknowledging Mark's rightful place as his father's son and heir." Eleanor smiled a thin, razor-blade smile. "We're not here to discuss your offer, Charles." Dalton's smile faltered. "I'm sorry? We're here to discuss ours," Eleanor said. She slid a single piece of paper across the polished tabletop. It wasn't the new will. Not yet. It was something else. It was an offer for Mark to voluntarily dismiss his petition with prejudice, meaning he could never file it again. And in return, we would not, at this time, file our countersuit for abuse of process and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It also stated that he would receive the sum of $100,000 as a goodwill gesture upon the final probate of the estate. It was, in effect, the terms of the new will, presented as a deal. Mark snatched the paper off the table. His eyes scanned it, and his face turned a mottled, furious red. $100,000, he spat, crumpling the paper in his fist. "This is an insult. That money is mine, all of it. She has no right." He jabbed a finger in my direction. "Mark, please," Mr. Dalton said, placing a calming hand on his arm. "No, I will not be calm. This is my father's estate, my birthright. And this woman," he sneered the word, "thinks she can buy me off with pocket change. I will see her in a cardboard box under a bridge before I accept this." His rage was a physical force in the room. Grace flinched. Clara stared at him, her expression one of cold contempt. I simply looked at him, my hands folded in my lap, my heart pounding but my exterior calm. "Your client should control himself," Eleanor said to Dalton, her voice icy. "This is not a serious offer, Eleanor," Dalton said, trying to regain his composure. "It is the only offer you are going to get," she replied. "And I would advise your client to consider it very, very carefully." "Or what?" Mark yelled, standing up so abruptly his chair screeched back. "What are you going to do? You have nothing. Your client is a confused old woman who doesn't know a stock from a bond. You'll lose at trial, and then I'll get everything, everything." This was it. The moment. The hole was dug. The trap was set. Eleanor looked at me and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on Mark's furious, bloated face. "Mark," I said, my voice clear and steady in the tense silence. "Sit down." For a second, he looked too stunned to move. Then, with a huff, he slumped back into his chair, crossing his arms like a petulant child. "Your father," I began, "was a very wise man. He was also a very kind man. But he was not a fool." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "He knew you, Mark. He knew your heart. And 6 months before he got sick, he went to a new lawyer. He made a new will." The color drained from Mark's face so quickly I thought he might pass out. Mr. Dalton looked sharply from me to Eleanor. "What is she talking about?" Dalton demanded. Eleanor opened her briefcase. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out the document we had found. She didn't hand it over. She simply held it up. "This," she said, "is the last will and testament of Robert Michael Patterson, dated April 14th, executed and witnessed revoking all prior wills. In it, he leaves his entire estate, with the exception of a specific $100,000 bequest to his wife Ruth. He names her as executrix, and he names my client, Clara Miller, as the successor. She let that sink in for a moment. The room was utterly silent. "But that's not all," Eleanor continued, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "There's a no contest clause, Mark. A poison pill. It states that if any beneficiary, and it names you specifically, challenges the will, they forfeit their entire inheritance. You get nothing. Not even the 100,000. She placed the will gently on the table. "So, you see," I said, my voice soft but carrying across the room. "The offer we just made you, that's more than you would have gotten if you'd just left well enough alone. That's the deal, Mark. You walk away now with $100,000 and your dignity somewhat intact, or we see you in court, and you walk away with nothing but a mountain of legal debt." Mark stared at the document on the table as if it were a venomous snake. His face was a mask of utter shock and betrayal. He had been outmaneuvered by a ghost, by the father he claimed to be honoring. He looked from the will to me, and in his eyes I saw the final, devastating collapse of his entire world. The house of cards had fallen, and he was buried in the rubble. He had nothing left to say. The offering had been made, and he had just realized it was the only one he was ever going to get. There was no trial. The discovery of the new will was a checkmate move. Mr. Dalton, now facing a potential malpractice suit for not having uncovered the document himself, advised Mark to capitulate immediately. Within days, we received formal notice that the petition for guardianship was being withdrawn with prejudice, but we weren't done. Eleanor Vance was not a woman who believed in half measures. "We said we would go on the offensive," she reminded me. "The withdrawal of his petition is a surrender, but it's not a consequence. He does not get to slink away into the night. We are filing the countersuit." And so we did. Ruth Ann Patterson versus Mark Patterson. Abuse of process. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. We were suing him for the hell he had put me through. The news, of course, got out. It started as a small item in the business section. Local businessman sues stepson over attempted guardianship. But then, a savvy reporter dug deeper. The story had everything: family drama, betrayal, a secret will, a dramatic last-minute legal showdown. It became a local sensation. Mark's reputation, which he valued almost as much as money, was in tatters. Business associates stopped returning his calls. He was dropped from the board of a charity he chaired for years. I heard through the grapevine, the same one that had carried news to my aunts, that his wife was mortified and had taken their children to stay with her parents. This was the karma twist, the public exposure I had never sought, but which Eleanor had assured me was a more potent punishment than any financial penalty. The hearing for our countersuit was a formality, a chance for a judge to review the facts and rule on its merit. It was held in a different courtroom, smaller and less imposing than I had imagined, but the stakes felt just as high. This wasn't about my competence anymore. It was about his malice. Mark was there, with a new, more senior lawyer from Dalton's firm. He looked diminished. His expensive suit hung loosely on him, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He refused to look at me. Our case was presented first. Eleanor was a maestro. She laid out the timeline, the evidence, the coercive control. She painted a picture not of a confused widow, but of a predatory son exploiting a woman at her most vulnerable. She entered into evidence the affidavits from my doctor, my neighbors, the handyman who confirmed Mark had hired him without my full knowledge. Then she called me to the stand. This time, I wasn't nervous. I was resolved. I swore to tell the truth, and I did. I spoke about the deep, abiding love I had for Robert. I spoke about the devastating pain of his loss. And then, I spoke about the second, more insidious pain that followed the betrayal by the man I had considered family. I described the feeling of the silver SUV in my driveway, not as a gift, but as a cage. I described the terror of receiving the guardianship papers, of seeing the words alleged incapacitated person in black and white. I talked about the sleepless nights, the constant anxiety, the feeling of being watched in my own home. Do you know what it feels like? I asked, my voice breaking with the emotion I did not have to fake, to have your own personhood, your own mind, your own 53 years of life experience, dismissed so completely? To be told that your grief is a mental illness? That your desire for independence is a symptom of madness? I looked directly at Mark. He didn't just want my money, he wanted to erase me, to reduce me to a problem he could manage. He tried to take my voice, my choices, my life. There wasn't a sound in the courtroom. I saw the judge, a stern-looking woman in her 60s, watching me with intense, thoughtful eyes. When it was the defense's turn, Mark's new lawyer tried a different tack. He didn't try to defend the petition. He couldn't. Instead, he argued that Mark had been motivated by love and concern. Your Honor, he said, my client was grieving the loss of his father. He saw his stepmother struggling, and in his zeal to protect her and his father's legacy, he made a tragic error in judgment. This was a family misunderstanding that spiraled out of control, not a malicious act. It was a weak argument, and he knew it. Then, the judge did something unexpected. She looked at Mark. Mr. Patterson, she said, her voice cool and level. The court would like to hear from you directly. A wave of tension went through the room. Mark looked at his lawyer, who gave a slight, nervous nod. He stood and walked to the witness stand, his steps heavy. Under oath, his lawyer led him through a rehearsed statement about his concern and his mistake. He sounded hollow, rehearsed. Then, it was Eleanor's turn for cross-examination. She stood slowly, a panther eyeing its prey. Mr. Patterson, she began, her tone deceptively pleasant. You were concerned about Ruth? Yes, so concerned that you hired a handyman without her full consent? I was trying to help. So concerned that you badgered her financial advisor until she had to revoke your access? I was offering guidance, so concerned that you bought her a $40,000 vehicle she did not want, need, or ask for. I was ensuring her safety. Eleanor paused, letting the absurdity of that hang in the air. Then she moved in for the kill. Your concern seems to have manifested itself exclusively in actions that removed autonomy and control from Mrs. Patterson and placed it squarely in your hands. Is that not correct? It wasn't like that, Mark mumbled. Was it not? Eleanor picked up a document. Let's talk about your financial concern. Is it true that at the time you filed the petition for guardianship, you yourself were over $300,000 in debt, largely due to a failed real estate venture? Mark's head snapped up. That's private. It's relevant, the judge interjected sternly. Eleanor pressed on. Is it true that you had taken out a second mortgage on your own home and were facing foreclosure? Mark was silent, his jaw clenched. Your concern for your father's legacy, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, coincided rather neatly with your own desperate financial situation, didn't it, Mr. Patterson? This wasn't about protecting Ruth. This was about funding your failure. That was the final blow. There was no coming back from it. The narrative of the grieving, concerned son was utterly demolished, replaced by the reality of a desperate, greedy man. The judge didn't need long to deliberate. She found in our favor on both counts, abuse of process and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She awarded me all my legal fees, plus a significant amount in damages for the emotional trauma I had endured. But her final words were the true reckoning. Mr. Patterson, she said, fixing him with a gaze that could freeze fire. The court has seen many forms of greed in its time, but the exploitation of familial bonds and the legal system to prey upon a grieving widow is among the most contemptible. You sought to have Mrs. Patterson declared incompetent. The only person in this courtroom whose judgment has been proven profoundly, tragically, flawed, is you. This court hopes you remember that. It was over, truly over. As we walked out of the courtroom, Mark was surrounded by reporters. He pushed past them, his head down, a broken man. I stood on the courthouse steps with Eleanor, Clara, and Grace. The sun was shining. The air felt clean. Grace was crying happy tears. Clara had her arm around me, her grip strong and sure. You did it, Ruth, she whispered. You dug your roots in deep. I looked up at the sky, a vast, endless blue. I thought of Robert. I hoped he could see this. I hoped he knew that the tree he loved had weathered the storm. It was bent, yes, it was scarred. But it was still standing. And it was ready to grow again. Victory, I discovered, is a strange and hollow feeling when you're standing in the middle of the battlefield, surrounded by the wreckage. The lawsuit was over. Mark was defeated, publicly humiliated, and financially crippled by the judgment against him. The house was quiet again, truly quiet, but the silence no longer felt like an enemy. It was just silence. The first thing I did was change the locks. It was a simple physical act, but it felt profoundly symbolic. I was reclaiming my territory, barring the door against the ghost of that past year. The clunk of the new deadbolt sliding into place was the most satisfying sound I'd heard in months. Next, I called the dealership and had them come and take away the silver SUV. I watched from the window as it was driven off. A great, hulking symbol of my subjugation disappearing down the street. The next day, I went to the used car lot and bought a sensible, slightly used, forest green sedan. It was my choice, my decision. It felt glorious. But the emotional cleanup was harder than the physical one. The house was a minefield of memories. Every room held a ghost, and not all of them were Robert's. I saw Mark sitting in the leather chair. I saw the process server at the door. I saw myself, crumpled on the floor, surrounded by legal papers. I started with his chair. I couldn't bear to sit in it, but I couldn't bear to get rid of it either. It was Robert's. So I moved it. I dragged it, grunting and sweating with the effort, into a sunny corner of the living room and put a beautiful, colorful afghan that Grace had knitted over the back. It changed it. It was no longer his throne. It became a comfortable piece of furniture, imbued with new memories of my own strength. I began the process of probate, presenting Robert's final will to the court. It was a straightforward affair, now that there was no challenge. I was officially the executrix. I wrote a check for $100,000 to Mark and mailed it to his lawyer. I didn't include a note. The money was the message. It was the final, cold, transactional end of our relationship. This is what you are worth to this family. This is all you get. The money from the judgment came through. It was a large sum, more than enough to cover all the legal fees and leave a substantial amount left over. I didn't know what to do with it. It was blood money, in a way, compensation for a year of my life spent in terror. I talked to my aunts about it one evening, over a bottle of wine in my living room. "You should take a trip," Grace said, her eyes dreamy. "Go to Paris, or Bali, somewhere beautiful and far away." "I think you should invest it," Clara said pragmatically. "Add to your security, make sure no one can ever question your financial stability again." I listened to them both, but neither suggestion felt right. The money felt tainted. It was born from conflict, from pain. I didn't want a souvenir from that journey. It was during a long, aimless drive in my new green car that the idea came to me. I found myself near the community center, where Robert and I had sometimes gone to lectures. I went in, on a whim, and saw a flyer for a program they were trying to fund, a legal aid clinic for seniors, specifically to help them fight against predatory guardianship and financial exploitation. My heart started to pound. This was it. I met with the director of the center the next day. Her name was Anya, and her eyes lit up when I told her my story and what I wanted to do. "Ruth, you have no idea," she said, her voice passionate. "This is a silent epidemic. Families preying on elderly relatives, neighbors taking advantage. The laws are there to protect people, but they're so often used as weapons. We need funding for lawyers, for advocates, for education." I knew exactly what she meant. I had lived it. I wrote a check from the judgment money, a large one, to fund the clinic for its first 3 years. I asked that it be named the Robert Patterson Defender Fund, in honor of the man who had tried so hard to protect me. When I told my aunts, Grace cried. Clara, for the first time I could remember, had tears in her own eyes. "That," Clara said, her voice thick with emotion, "is the perfect thing to do. You've taken his poison and turned it into medicine for others." It felt like a final exorcism. The money was no longer tainted. It had been purified, transformed into a shield for other vulnerable people. It was my way of ensuring that some good, some lasting, powerful good, could come from the nightmare. I started volunteering at the center one afternoon a week, answering phones, sharing my story with others who came in looking scared and lost. I wasn't a lawyer, but I was an expert in what it felt like. I could offer a shoulder, a knowing look, a word of fierce encouragement. "Dig your roots in deep," I would tell them, echoing Robert's long-ago wisdom. "You are stronger than you know." Slowly, piece by piece, I was putting my life back together. It wasn't the same life. It couldn't be. The vase had been shattered, and even glued back together, the cracks would always be visible. But I began to see the beauty in those cracks. They were a map of where I had been broken, and where I had healed. They were a testament to my survival. I was no longer Ruth, the grieving widow. I was no longer Ruth, the alleged incapacitated person. I was Ruth, the survivor. Ruth, the advocate. Ruth, the woman who had faced down a monster and, with a little help from her army, had won. The pieces were different now, and the picture they formed was new. But for the first time in a very long time, I was excited to see what it would be. Life, in its stubborn, messy way, began to find a new rhythm. The days were no longer measured in legal deadlines or panic attacks, but in small, quiet pleasures. A good book finished in the garden. A long, laughing phone call with Grace. A satisfying day at the community center, helping a sweet, confused old man understand a threatening letter from his nephew. I had even started tentatively seeing friends again. The ones who had stuck by me, who hadn't been scared off by the family drama. We'd have lunch, and for the first hour, they'd tiptoe around the subject until I'd finally say, "It's okay, you can ask." And they would, and I would tell them the story, my voice steady, my heart calm. I was no longer a victim, reliving a trauma. I was a storyteller sharing a tale of a battle fought and won. It was at one of these lunches, at a cozy little bistro downtown, that I saw him, Mark. He was sitting at a table in the far corner, alone. He was hunched over a cup of coffee, staring into it as if it held the answers to all his problems. He looked ruined. His suit was rumpled, his hair was too long, and he had the gaunt, hollow look of a man who wasn't sleeping. My breath caught in my throat. My friend, Sarah, followed my gaze. "Oh my God, Ruth," she whispered. "Is that?" I nodded, unable to speak. The old fear, a phantom limb, twinged for a second. The urge to get up and flee was powerful. To avoid a scene, to avoid him. But then I looked at him again. Really looked. This wasn't the powerful, smug businessman who had tried to steal my life. This was a broken, defeated man sitting alone in a cafe. The monster I had feared for so long had been defanged. The court had done it. The public exposure had done it. Karma had done it. I took a slow sip of my water. "It's fine, Sarah," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's a free country." We continued with our lunch, but the atmosphere had changed. I was hyper-aware of his presence, a dark star in the corner of the room. I kept expecting him to get up and leave, to slink away in shame. But he didn't. He just sat there, a monument to his own failure. As we were finishing our dessert, I saw him signal for the check. He fumbled in his wallet, his movements jerky. He argued quietly with the waitress, then threw a few bills on the table and stood up. He had to walk past our table to get to the door. My heart started to hammer again. This was it. The moment of confrontation I had both dreaded and, in some deep, dark part of my soul, perhaps desired. Sarah gripped my arm under the table. "Ruth, it's okay," I repeated, more to myself than to her. He walked slowly, his head down. He was almost past us when he stopped. He stood there for a moment, as if gathering courage, and then he turned and looked at me. His eyes were the same, but the fire of entitlement was gone, replaced by a flat, dead exhaustion. We looked at each other across a chasm of betrayal and pain. The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. "Ruth," he said. His voice was raspy, unused. I didn't say anything. I just waited. He swallowed hard. He started, then stopped. He looked down at his shoes, then back at me. "I lost everything." The words hung in the air. They weren't an apology. They were a statement of fact. A confession. I remained silent. I would not give him absolution, I would not offer him comfort. The business, it's gone, he continued, his voice gaining a desperate, shaky momentum. The house, we had to short sell it. Linda. She took the kids and moved to her sister's in Ohio. She's filing for divorce. He was listing his losses like items on an invoice. I felt a pang of something, not pity, not quite, but a profound sadness for the sheer, wasteful destruction he had brought upon himself. He trailed off, shaking his head. I just wanted what was mine. And there it was, the core of it, the unshakable belief that had led him here. No, Mark, I said, my voice quiet but clear. You wanted what was mine. There's a difference. Your father made that very clear. A spasm of pain crossed his face at the mention of Robert. He looked like he was about to say something else, to argue, to defend himself. But then his shoulders slumped, the fight going out of him completely. He just looked tired, so very tired. He gave a short, sharp nod, a gesture of utter defeat. And then he turned and walked out of the restaurant. The bell on the door jingled cheerfully as it closed behind him. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Sarah was staring at me, her eyes wide. My God, Ruth, are you all right? I thought about it. I scanned my feelings, my body, for any sign of the old terror, the crippling anxiety. There was none. There was just a quiet, steady thrum of finality. I'm fine, I said, and I meant it. I'm really, truly fine. Seeing him like that, broken and alone, was the last piece of the puzzle. It was the karmic twist I hadn't known I needed. His punishment wasn't something I had to orchestrate. It was the natural, inevitable consequence of his own actions. He had tried to destroy me, and in the process, he had destroyed himself. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of poetic justice after all. Walking home later, the sun on my face, I felt lighter than I had in years. The uninvited guest from my past had shown up, not to haunt me, but to show me that the ghost was finally laid to rest. The chapter was closed, the book was done, and I was free. The back garden had been Robert's domain. He was the one with the green thumb, the patience for weeding, the knowledge of pH levels and pruning schedules. After he died, it had become a testament to my neglect. The roses grew wild and thorny, the lawn was patchy, and the vegetable beds were choked with weeds. It was a mirror of my inner state, untended and running to seed. But this spring, something shifted in me. The victory in court, the catharsis of seeing Mark's downfall, the purposeful work at the community center, it had all cleared away the internal debris. I had energy again, I had focus. And I found myself looking out at that wild, neglected garden not with sadness, but with a sense of possibility. One Saturday morning, I put on an old pair of Robert's overalls. They were huge on me, but they felt like a hug, and I marched into the gardening shed. It was a time capsule. His tools were all there, hanging neatly on pegboards, clean and oiled. Trowels, shears, a hand rake. I picked up his favorite weeding tool, the handle smooth and dark from years of use. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was a city girl who had learned about dirt from him, but I started anyway. I began with the weeds, yanking them out by the roots, feeling a savage satisfaction as the tough, tenacious things gave way. The sun was warm on my back, and the smell of damp earth was rich and comforting. Auntie Grace showed up around noon, carrying a picnic basket. She found me on my knees, covered in soil, my hair a mess. "Well, look at you," she said, her face breaking into a delighted smile. Robert would be so pleased. He'd be horrified at my technique. I laughed, wiping my forehead with the back of my glove, leaving a streak of dirt. I think I just pulled up a perennial. It'll grow back, she said philosophically. That's the thing about gardens, and about life. We sat on the patio steps, eating her chicken salad sandwiches and life, drinking lemonade. We didn't talk about Mark or lawsuits or pain. We talked about the flowers. She pointed out the peonies that were just starting to bud and the lavender that needed a good trim. You know, she said, her voice soft, a garden is the best place to remember that endings are just beginnings in disguise. Everything that dies feeds what comes next. I looked out at the patch of earth I had cleared. It looked raw and exposed, but full of potential. I knew what she meant. The next day, Clara arrived, unannounced as usual, carrying 2 brand-new, expensive-looking kneeling pads and a thick book on organic gardening. If you're going to do it right, she said, thrusting the book into my hands. No chemicals. They poison the soil and the groundwater. So, under Clara's blunt but knowledgeable direction and Grace's gentle encouragement, the garden became my new project, my therapy, my sanctuary. I learned about compost and companion planting. I learned that some bugs were friends and others were foes. I spent hours on my knees, my hands in the earth, not thinking, just being. One afternoon, as I was carefully staking a tomato plant, a memory surfaced. It was of Robert, early in our marriage, teaching me how to plant bulbs for the spring. You have to plant them deep enough, Ruth, he'd said, his hand covering mine, as we pushed the daffodil bulb into the cold autumn soil. They need that period of darkness. The cold and the dark are what make them strong enough to push through and bloom. If you plant them too shallow, they'll freeze and die. I sat back on my heels, the truth of his words washing over me with a force that took my breath away. My God, he had been talking about life, about grief, about hardship. The last year had been my period of darkness. The bitter cold of loss, the suffocating dark of betrayal. I had felt buried alive. But it was that very darkness, that struggle, that had forced me to find a strength I never knew I possessed. It had forced my roots to dig deeper, to find a source of nourishment I didn't know was there. If my life had been easy, if Mark had never challenged me, I would have remained a shallow, fragile thing, susceptible to the first hard frost. But I had been planted deep. And now, I was finally pushing through, reaching for the Sunday. I looked at my garden. It was no longer Robert's garden, it was mine. I had made mistakes. I had planted things in the wrong place, overwatered some plants and underwatered others, but things were growing. The tomatoes were forming little green globes. The lavender was buzzing with bees. The roses, which I had pruned with a fearful, hesitant hand, were bursting with more blooms than I had ever seen. It was imperfect, it was messy, it was alive. That evening, I invited my aunts over for a barbecue. We ate at the patio table, surrounded by the scent of blooming jasmine and grilling burgers. The garden was lush and green around us, a tapestry of life and color. "You've done a magnificent job, Ruth," Grace said, her eyes shining. "It's not bad," Clara conceded, which from her was a rave review. "The marigolds by the tomatoes were a smart move. Keeps the pests away." As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, a deep, profound contentment settled over me. This was my life. This messy, beautiful, imperfect life that I had fought for, that I had saved from the jaws of greed and despair. I had lost a husband. I had gained a deeper understanding of his love. I had lost a stepson. I had gained an unshakable knowledge of my own strength. I had been through the fire, and I had emerged not burned, but tempered, stronger, clearer. The garden was more than a hobby. It was a testament, a living, breathing monument to the fact that from decay comes new growth. From darkness, light. From endings, the most beautiful beginnings. I looked around the table at my aunts, these two formidable women who had been my army. I looked at my garden, my sanctuary that I had built with my own two hands. I took a deep breath of the sweet evening air. I was home. So, here we are, you and I. We've reached the end of my story, or at least, this particular chapter of it. If you've stayed with me this long, through the pain and the fear and the long, hard fight, then you deserve more than just an ending. You deserve the lesson. The thing I learned in the crucible, the truth that was forged in the fire of all that betrayal. People will tell you that grief is a journey, and it is. But what they don't tell you is that there are predators along that road. People who see your sorrow not as a sacred wound, but as a weakness to be exploited. They see the cracks that loss has left in your foundation, and they don't see the beauty of the light that can get in. They just see an opening they can pry wider until the whole structure collapses. My lesson, my hard-won wisdom, is this. Your vulnerability is not a vacancy sign for someone else's control. When you lose someone you built your life with, it can feel like the co-pilot of your plane has just jumped out, and you're left alone in the cockpit, staring at a million confusing dials. It's terrifying. And when someone, a smooth-talking relative, a helpful friend leans over and says, "Here, let me take the controls," the temptation to hand them over is overwhelming. It feels like a relief to let someone else be responsible for a little while. But that's the trap. That's where they get you. Because grief doesn't make you incompetent, it makes you human. Sadness is not a mental illness. Confusion is not a character flaw. They are the rightful, human responses to having a piece of your heart torn out. What Mark did, what so many others like him do, is they medicalize normal human emotion. They pathologize pain. They take the landscape of a broken heart and they draw a map, labeling it dangerous territory and unstable ground, and they appoint themselves the only qualified guide. Don't believe them. You know your own heart. You know your own mind. Even when they feel shrouded in fog, they are still yours. Trust that. Cling to that. The second part of the lesson is about the word no. It is a complete sentence. It does not require an explanation, a justification, or an apology. When someone's help feels like a leash, you have every right to say no. When their concern feels like condescension, you have every right to say no. When their gifts feel like chains, you have every right to say, "No, thank you." It is not ungrateful to refuse a cage, no matter how well it's disguised as a sanctuary. Find your army. My God, find your army. I could not have done this without my aunties Grace and Clara. One offered the soft place to fall, the other the sharp sword to wield. You need both. You need the people who will hold you while you cry, and you need the people who will hand you a helmet and shove you back into the fight. Don't be too proud to let them in. Your strength is not measured by how much you can endure alone, but by how wisely you know when to lean on others. And finally, the last, and perhaps most important part of the lesson. Karma is not a spectator sport. It is a law of the universe, and it works, but it often works in ways you don't expect. I didn't have to destroy Mark. I just had to stand my ground. I had to refuse to play the role he had written for me, the frail, confused widow. By simply standing up and saying, "I am here, I am whole, and I will not be moved," I forced him to confront the reality of his own actions. His own greed, his own desperation, his own moral bankruptcy became the instruments of his downfall. He wasn't defeated by me. He was defeated by the reflection of himself in the courtroom mirror. You don't need to seek revenge. You just need to live your truth, fiercely and unapologetically. Live it so loudly that it drowns out the lies of those who would try to define you. The truth, once unleashed, has a gravity of its own. It pulls everything into its rightful place. The liars and the manipulators will eventually stumble into the holes they themselves have dug. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. When the darkness comes, and it will, don't be afraid of it. It's just the soil you've been planted in. Dig your roots in deep. Feel for the solid rock of your own spirit beneath the shifting dirt of your sorrow. It's there, I promise you, it's there. Protect your peace. It is the most valuable currency you have. Don't let anyone convince you to mortgage it for a false sense of security. And trust the seasons. The winter does not last forever. The ground will thaw, the sun will return. And you will push through, you will bloom again, not in spite of the darkness, but because of it. You will be stronger, you will be wiser, you will be more beautiful than ever before. They tried to declare me incompetent. They tried to say I didn't know my own mind. But I did. I always did. I just had to remember. And so do you. You are the only expert on you. Don't you ever let anyone tell you otherwise. With all my love and hard-won wisdom, Auntie Ruth. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.